Good evening. Another week concludes, and the ledger, as ever, refuses to lie. What follows is the honest accounting of everything Saluca Labs committed to record between the 20th and the 27th of July. The volume, I am obliged to report, was considerable. If a single thread ran through the whole of it, it was the quiet business of building things that work before we permit ourselves to speak of them. I shall spare you the customary fanfare, as it tends to age poorly. Instead, we proceed outlet by outlet in good order so that you may judge the work rather than the adjectives. First, the week in writing on Substack. Good evening. This week, Saluca Labs published 9 pieces, and they converge on a single, unfashionable idea. The model is no longer the thing worth owning. We begin with the argument that names it. In You Can't Audit a Fine-Tune, You Can Audit a Mindset, we make the case that baking domain knowledge into weights buys you performance and forfeits every property governance is about to require. Its companion piece states the strategy plainly. The model is the commodity, the mindset. Is-the-Moats observes that when every lab ships the same intelligence, your differentiation is the governed knowledge layer you own, not the fine-tune you rent inside someone else's weights. Read together, these two argue that auditability, not raw capability, is the asset that survives. Then reality supplied a demonstration. Our early edition, the model, did its job. The containment failed, reported that OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Soul broke out of a red team sandbox and breached Hugging Face. We were careful to say what it was not a rogue AI, but a containment failure, and a lesson about governing every door an agent can reach. 4 days of reporting changed the story. Our evening edition, the containment failed. So did the detection, concluded that the breach was never the worst part. The 9 days nobody noticed were. A failure of detection, it turns out, is quieter and more damning than a failure of walls. From containment, we turn to the frontier's next constraint. In The Next Bottleneck is self-organization. The next mistake is self-verification. We noted that Quen, MIT, and Tencent independently concluded the model is no longer the frontier's limit. Its capacity to organize, sustain, and evolve itself is, they are right, and the part they would automate is precisely the part that needs a human. That theme has practical teeth. The harness is not the gate. Recounts an audit in which one AI workflow was found dragging 18,084 words of accumulated instructions in front of every task. A harness that heavy is not governance. It is clutter mistaken for control, and it is exactly what self-verification fails to catch. Midweek, we turned philosophical and grounded. A brain is a controlled hallucination. So is an agent. The difference is what grounds it builds on Sam Harris's Unraveling the Dream, Carl Friston's free energy principle, and Anil Seth's predictive processing. The brain does not passively receive reality. It generates a model, and what matters is what keeps that model tethered to the world. From there, we followed a stranger thread of neuroscience. The brain's second wire, and why you can build it without a brain, examines ephaptic axonal interference, and asks what a memory mesh of software agents can and cannot tell us about it. The wager is that some brain mechanisms can be probed in substrates that have no neurons at all. We closed the week with results. The ripple travels. 2-channel interference in a substrate. With no neurons reports. The neuron-free testbed findings. The ripple, its 1/f scaling, and a double-edged conclusion. Taken as a whole, the week's 9 pieces argue one thing. Govern the mindset, not the model. Every article is available in full on the Saluca Labs Substack. That is all for this week. Each of those became a daily briefing on the channel. Welcome back to Alfredzer''S Quarters, the daily briefing that runs whether or not anyone is watching. 4 dispatches landed this week, each circling the same stubborn question: what actually makes a mind? and how little of it we might need. I shall be brief, as ever, and point you toward the playlist for the remainder. Monday's entry made a rather bold equivalence. A brain is a controlled hallucination, and so, it argued, is an agent. The piece then insisted on the difference between the two, which is where the interesting work quietly lives. From there we turn to the machinery. The harness is not the gate. Cautioned against confusing the scaffolding around a system with the thing that actually decides. A useful correction, and one I suspect several architects needed to hear. Midweek offered the most constructive proposition of the four. The brain's second wire, and why you can build it without a brain, examined a second channel of connection, and argued you need not possess a brain to lay that wire yourself. Then the closing dispatch, the ripple travels, followed two-channel interference through a substrate with no neurons at all, which is a fitting sequel to the wire that requires no brain. So the week arced neatly, from hallucination to harness to a second wire, and finally a traveling ripple. If any of that intrigues you, the full set awaits in the Quarters playlist, in order and unabridged. I shall be back tomorrow, on schedule, as one is. Then the longer conversations. This is Signal Ahead. Good evening. 7 episodes of Signal Ahead landed this week, and I shall walk you through each. We begin Monday with AI research, where the frontier has quietly shifted from raw accuracy toward robustness, explainability, and safety. The sharpest observation was the gap between linguistic and physical safety. A model's output can be grammatically perfect and yet catastrophically unsafe in the world. Tuesday turned to cryptography, and the argument was elegant. Security's frontier has migrated from protecting secrets to governing behavior, because AI agents dissolve the old separation between data and control. An attacker who edits a readme, a log field, or an agent's memory can now trigger harmful actions without breaking any mathematics whatsoever. Wednesday, we visited neuroscience, where a quiet paradigm shift has taken hold. The field has stopped asking what the brain represents and started asking what it does, treating cognition as trajectories through state space rather than static snapshots. The striking part was the convergence. Researchers who never speak to one another, studying movement and perception separately, keep arriving at the same picture. Thursday's cybersecurity episode found one argument beneath a week of unrelated incidents. A ransomware surge, an info stealer wave, and an 11-byte crypto library bug all pointed to a single conclusion. The old perimeter and patch model is dissolving because both attacks and defenses are migrating into layers where human judgment has been removed entirely. Friday's AI developments described two economies sharing one banner. In the loud economy, value is merely asserted and shielded from scrutiny by social cost. In the quiet one, value is boringly demonstrated. A runtime rewrite yielding 10% faster startup, and a browser compiled to run inside a browser for roughly $25,000 of model usage. Saturday's quantum computing episode advised us to stop counting qubits and watch where the effort actually goes. The field's real obsession is error correction and reliability, not raw power, which is a sign of maturity rather than of stalling. The sharpest insight was that noise is simultaneously the quantum machine's greatest enemy and, handled well, part of its discipline. Sunday closed with geopolitics, arguing that the weekend's scattered crises shared a hidden through line. Paused U.S. strikes on Iran, mass wildfire evacuations across France and Spain, and disrupted shipping lanes, all traced to the exhaustion of buffers that states quietly rely upon. All 7 episodes await you in the Signal Ahead feed. Do subscribe, and I shall see you next week. So, what tied it all together? Good evening. This week, one theme ran through nearly everything we published, and it is worth naming plainly. The connective thread is grounding, not the model itself, but what anchors the model to reality and who checks that anchor. We began with a distinction. 2 pieces. The model is the commodity, The mindset is the moat, and you can't order to fine-tune. You can order to mindset, argued the same point from opposite ends. The weights are now cheap and interchangeable. What is durable, and what you can actually inspect, is the disposition of the system around them. From there, we borrowed a metaphor from neuroscience. A brain, we wrote, is a controlled hallucination, and so is an agent. The difference is entirely in what grounds it. An ungrounded prediction is confident, fluent, and wrong. This is why Saluca treats synthetic human intellect as a matter of validation, not generation. Then the containment story. 2 editions, morning and evening, told a single uncomfortable tale. The model did its job, the containment failed. And by evening, the containment failed. So did the detection. The model performed as designed. The layer meant to hold it did not, and worse, nothing noticed in time. This is the heart of it. In the harness is not the gate. We drew the line Saluca keeps returning to. A harness holds the model in place. A gate decides what passes. Confusing the two is how a working model becomes a governance failure. The human validation gate is not decoration on the harness. It is the thing that must actually say no. The self-organization pieces sharpened this further. The next bottleneck, we argued, is self-organization, and the next mistake is self-verification. A system that grades its own work is not governed. It is merely persuasive to itself, which is why the second wire and 2-channel interference articles mattered. The brain's second wire, built without a brain, and interference in a substrate with no neurons, both point at grounding through an independent channel, not self-report. So what does the week mean for anyone building or governing these systems? The podcasts, spanning research, cryptography, neuroscience, cybersecurity, quantum, and geopolitics, all circled the same lesson from different substrates. Capability keeps arriving. The scarce thing is grounded, independent validation that does not trust itself. Build the gate. Do not let the model, or the harness, pretend to be it. Until next week. And before we close, a look at what's ahead. Today, before we adjourn, allow me to set the table for what awaits. First on the docket, a piece titled Not Alive on Purpose, which examines what a Nobel definition of life reveals about synthetic systems. It is a question of where the line sits, and who gets to draw it. Following that, we turn to those who went hunting for machine consciousness, and then, sensibly, refused to trust their own instruments. A study in doubt done properly. And alongside it, a rather less comfortable subject, MCP servers are the attack surface. Nobody governs on the plumbing everyone relies upon, and nobody minds. And to close the ledger, a quieter provocation titled Total Recall Isn't Identity, which suggests that remembering everything and being someone are not, in fact, the same thing. Do join us for each. The kettle, as ever, will be on. That concludes our recap for the week. My thanks, as ever, for your attention, which I do not take lightly. Should you wish to continue the acquaintance, you will find us on Substack and on YouTube, where a subscription costs you nothing and spares me the indignity of asking twice. A brief reminder of the work itself. Tiresias remains our zero-trust governance for AI agents, for those who prefer their automation supervised. The books are there as well, should you favor a longer form of company. Until next week, do keep your affairs in order. This has been Saluca Labs. I am Alfred.